The black waitress disrespected by engineering students until she revived the 1973 NASA engine. They laughed when she dropped their ketchup. They had no idea she once built machines that touched the stars. It was a Tuesday morning at Mel's Highway Diner in Huntsville, Alabama. The kind of place where the coffee's strong, the eggs are rubbery, and nobody asks your last name unless you forget the hash browns. The bell above the door jingled with mechanical predictability as four college boys shuffled in, drenched in Red Bull arrogance and Auburn University gear. They were engineering majors, and they wanted everyone to know it. 4 coffees, 2 waffles, one of those. Wait, the tallest one squinted at the menu with mock seriousness. Do you have, like, vegan turkey bacon or some lab-grown tofu crap? His friends burst out laughing like it was the height of comedy. Behind the counter, Loretta James didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. She'd seen worse. In fact, she'd survived worse. Regular bacon, she said, her voice low, molasses thick. Or none. The tall boy Braden or Jackson or some other frat shirt name grinned at his buddies. None then. Gotta keep this machine clean. He gestured to his chest like he was chiseled out of titanium. Another round of cackles. Loretta turned away and started pouring coffee into thick, chipped mugs. Her hands were steady, precise. At 57, she'd been working at Mel's for 10 years. Not because she had to, because she needed to. You used to do something else? One of the boys asked when she returned with the coffee. The question was soaked in that Southern brand sarcasm, fake politeness twisted around a sneer. Used to work with tools, she said, setting down the mugs. Real ones. Like fixing cars? One of them snorted. Or, like, screwdrivers and wrenches and stuff? Loretta smiled, a slow thing, like a door creaking open after years of rust. They didn't ask more. Didn't care. She was just a waitress. Black. Older. Disposable. They went back to arguing about thrust vector control algorithms and 3D printed titanium. And she went back to her work. What they didn't know, what almost nobody knew, was that in 1973, Loretta James helped bring a dead engine back to life. Not just any engine. The RL-10B-2 prototype, a marvel of its time, buried deep in the archives of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. She had been 19, the only black girl in the whole department. The only one who could hear the engine sing. That was decades ago, before they closed the lab, before her brother died, before the lawsuit, before her world cracked. But some ghosts refused to stay dead. The bell jingled again, this time more desperate. Hank, the cook, stuck his head out from the kitchen. Loretta, someone's at the back. Says it's urgent. She wiped her hands on her apron and made her way past the jukebox that hadn't worked since Clinton's first term, past the stack of yellowed newspapers with moon landings and war headlines. At the back door stood a man in a NASA badge and sun-creased khakis. "Ma'am, you Loretta James?" he asked, voice clipped and military precise. She didn't answer, just stared. "I'm Dr. Sheldon Rivers, NASA Propulsion Division. We need your help." She blinked, slowly, as if waking from a dream she'd buried decades deep. "Engine 6A," he said. "The one from the 1973 files. It's failed. We can't read half the notes, and the rest don't make sense." "I wrote those notes," she said flatly. He nodded. "That's why I'm here." The boys in booth 3 were still arguing over nozzle expansion ratios when Loretta walked past them, untying her apron. "Hank, I'm clocking out." "You all right?" Hank asked, wiping grease from his forehead. "Got a machine to fix," she said. The Auburn boys chuckled when they saw her walking out with the NASA guy. "Hey, don't forget our waffles," one of them called. She didn't answer. At Marshall Space Flight Center, time had folded in on itself. The main bay was filled with artifacts from another air oxygen tanks with faded serial numbers, half-dismantled turbines, manuals written on yellowing paper with hand-drawn diagrams. In the center of it all was Engine 6A, her engine. And it was dying. "She's not getting stable burn," Dr. Rivers explained. "We triple-checked the software, the fuel ratios, everything. But she shakes. Every time we test fire, she rattles like she's coming apart." Loretta walked toward it. The metal was dusty, cold. But beneath the grime, she saw the soul of the thing. It was like seeing an old friend on life support. "This one don't run on code," she murmured, placing a hand on its side. "She runs on rhythm." Rivers frowned. "Excuse me." She closed her eyes. "Back in '73, It had taken her 6 weeks to understand the vibration harmonics. She'd done it with paper, pencil, and her own ears. She could hear imbalance, like a singer hears when someone's off-key. They'd called her the engine whisperer. Behind her back, of course. Loretta stepped back. I need a wrench. The old kind. And quiet. The room fell still. She began by removing a panel no one had touched in 30 years. Inside was a mess of tubing, burnout sensors, and something that made Rivers gasp. Is that a hand-welded junction? Because the machine needed breathe-in room, she said. For the next 4 hours, nobody dared interrupt. She dismantled and reassembled, rewired oxygen feeds, adjusted tolerances by hand, and at one point shoved a stool under the combustion chamber to align her soul back to the earth. The engineers watched, baffled, as this woman in a faded diner dress performed what looked like ritual and repair in equal measure. Finally, she stepped back. Run her. You sure? She's been waiting long enough. They initiated the test fire. The room shook, then steadied. The roar of the engine filled the bay, not a rattle, not a cough, just pure, clean power. For the first time in decades, Engine 6A roared like it had in her youth. People clapped. Rivers stood in stunned silence. One of the interns muttered, "She brought it back from the dead." The next morning, the 4 Auburn boys came back to Mel's, ready for more coffee and another round of juvenile jokes. But the stool behind the counter was empty. "Where's that waitress?" one of them asked. Hank, flipping eggs without looking up, said, "She's busy." "Doing what?" He pointed to the TV hanging in the corner. On the screen, Loretta stood in front of the engine, being interviewed by NASA News. The cheer read, "Loretta James, former propulsion engineer, revives historic NASA engine." The boys stared, slack-jawed. One of them whispered, "Wait. That's her." Hank nodded. "You boys should learn to recognize greatness, especially when it serves you waffles." The bell jingled again. But this time, nobody laughed. 3 days after the engine roared to life again, the name Loretta James was on every screen across NASA's internal comms. Her inbox zone she hadn't opened since the Bush administration was flooded with messages from propulsion teams, aerospace historians, and even astronauts who remembered her work. But Loretta wasn't reading any of them. She was sitting alone in the observation room overlooking Test Base 6, watching the now silent engine rest like a tamed dragon. "You sure you don't want to talk to the press?" Dr. Rivers asked from the doorway. She shook her head. "Not my kind of stage." Rivers leaned against the doorframe, folding his arms. "You made history." "I made balance," she corrected softly. "History just got loud about it." There was a moment of silence. Then Rivers cleared his throat. "Loretta, we have another situation. A propulsion anomaly. Deep space module, scheduled for unmanned launch next month. We thought maybe." "Don't." She cut him off gently, but firmly. "I'm not coming back. But your work, your instincts." "My work was buried in a storage unit for 40 years, she said. "My instincts were laughed out of rooms before you were born. I gave this place my hands, my eyes, my damn rhythm. And then they replaced it with software and silence." Rivers nodded slowly. "I get it. I do. But the thing is, we're different now." She gave a tired smile. "Y'all keep saying that. But your engineers still couldn't fix a machine until someone in a diner uniform did." He looked like he wanted to say more, but thought better of it. Instead, he handed her a small envelope. "It's from Dr. Mendez, your old supervisor. She retired last year. Said if I ever found you again, I should give you this." Loretta took the envelope with cautious fingers. When Rivers left, she turned it over. On the back was a single line in neat, shaky script. "I never forgot what they did to you. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder." She didn't cry. She just folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket. That afternoon, she returned to the diner. Hank greeted her with a mock salute. "Rocket Queen returns. Still got those biscuits from yesterday?" she asked. "Saved you 3. Figured even NASA can't make biscuits like me." She smiled, slid into her usual booth, and watched the familiar chaos of eggs, clatter, and people who didn't know what had happened behind that engine. Then the door opened. It was one of the Auburn boys, Eli, the quieter one, the one who hadn't laughed quite as hard. He walked in alone, no swagger this time, just uncertainty. He spotted her and froze. Loretta raised an eyebrow. "You ordering, or just here to gawk?" He walked over slowly, fidgeting with his hoodie strings. I saw the interview. Online. I figured. He stood there awkwardly. I didn't know. Didn't ask either. He winced. I guess I wanted to say sorry. We were your idiots. We thought you were just a waitress, she offered. He nodded. But you were an engineer. A real one. You saved something no one else could. She leaned forward slightly. You think that means I stopped being a waitress? He blinked. What do you mean? I'm still one, she said. I still make minimum wage, still pour coffee, still get tipped less because of the color of my skin or the tired look on my face. Being an engineer, being someone who made something beautiful, it doesn't erase the rest. Eli didn't know what to say. But, she added, owning your ignorance is the first real step to being more than a boy in a college sweatshirt. He looked up, hopeful. She pointed to a seat across from her. You hungry? He nodded. Good. You're buying. I want waffles. A week passed. Then two. Loretta kept working the counter, but things were different now. People looked at her longer, some with admiration, some with confusion, most with disbelief. One woman whispered, "That can't be her," to her husband. Another slipped a business card on the table. STM Girls National Board Member Coffee? She ignored most of it, until a letter arrived. It was from the Smithsonian. They were organizing an exhibit on unsung heroes of American aerospace engineering. They wanted to feature her. Not just her name, but her original notebooks, hand-sketched diagrams, photographs if she had them. She did. They were in a box in her attic, right next to her brother's old trumpet and a tattered copy of The Souls of Black Folk. She hesitated. Then she made a call. The day of the exhibit's opening, she wore the same diner shoe scuffed, broken, but paired them with her one good coat. Dr. Rivers met her at the entrance. He was different now, a little more humble, a little less doctor. Inside, there was a photograph black and white of her at 19, standing next to engine 6A with a wrench longer than her arm. Her name was finally spelled right. People pointed. Some asked for selfies. Others just stared. And then she saw them, dozens of young girls, black and brown, wide-eyed and curious, their hands pressed to the glass where her sketches were displayed. One of them turned and ran over. Are you Ms. Loretta? She smiled. That's me. The girl held out a notebook. Can you sign this? I want to build engines too. Real ones. Loretta took the notebook and signed her name carefully. Then she added beneath it, listen to the rhythm. It's always there. Back in Alabama, things changed slowly. The boys from Auburn came by more often. Not to joke, but to ask questions. One day, Eli even brought his whole project team. Loretta didn't give them formulas or blueprints. She gave them stories, made them listen to the history they'd never read, told them about Bessie Coleman, Katherine Johnson, and the hundreds of names that never made it onto plaques. Eventually, someone started calling her Professor James. The name stuck. She never went back to NASA. Never needed to. But the next time they fired up a new test engine, one that used old harmonics and new alloys, they named it LJ1. For Loretta James. She didn't cry that day either. She just listened and smiled. Because finally, the rhythm was right. In the months that followed the Smithsonian exhibit, Loretta's life began to unfold in strange new ways. She had been invisible for so long that visibility itself felt foreign, almost violent. Her mailbox, once home to unpaid utility bills and diner coupons, now filled with invitations. Universities, women's groups, STEM conferences, even talk shows. She turned most of them down. She didn't want to be a celebrity. She wanted to be understood. But one envelope made her stop. It was hand-addressed, no stamp, just slipped beneath the door of her apartment. Inside, a letter written in ballpoint ink, all caps. My daughter came home from school and told me she wants to be an engineer because of you. She said you look like her. Thank you for making her believe. Loretta sat on her couch for a long time after reading that. The television played a rerun of some crime drama in the background, but she wasn't watching. Her mind was drifting, pulled backward. She thought about her first day at NASA, walking into that white hall with black hair pressed and shoes too tight. Every hallway was lined with men in short sleeves and ties, all looking through her like she didn't belong. But she had stayed. She had learned the rhythm of machines better than any textbook. And now she was teaching it without even trying. One evening, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Eli again, holding a thick folder and wearing the sheepish look he always did around her. We're working on a project for the lunar cryogenic engine, he said. It's a mock-up for class, nothing fancy. But we tried your airflow loop method, the one you described at the diner, and it worked. Loretta raised an eyebrow. You're telling me you took what I said over eggs and hash browns and turned it into an academic model? He smiled. Better. We ran it through simulation. Our professor said it's the first thermal cycle he's seen that didn't buckle under redundancy loss. She stepped aside and gestured him in. Her living room smelled like coffee and dust. All right, let's see this miracle folder. For the next hour, she read through their notes, red-pinned the margins, and corrected every false assumption with a firm but patient tone. Then she closed the folder and handed it back. You've got good bones, she said. But don't just simulate. Feel it. Build it with your hands if you want to understand its breadth. I wish we had a place to do that, Eli said. There's no funding for our team. School's cutting back. We can't even access the 3D printer lab half the week. Loretta leaned back in her chair. She stared at the water stain on her ceiling for a long time before she said, maybe it's time I built something again. 2 months later, the back of Mel's diner didn't smell like bacon anymore. It smelled like solder, copper, and sweat. The storage unit behind the building, once filled with broken booths and rusted mop buckets, had been cleaned, painted, and converted. On the door, someone had stenciled the name, the engine room. It wasn't much. A few workbenches, some salvaged parts, an ancient lathe machine that groaned louder than it worked. But it was a start. Students came. At first, just Eli and his team. Then word spread. Local kids, college dropouts, veterans, even a retired mechanic from down the street. They came for curiosity, for knowledge, for her. Loretta ran the space like she ran her section at the diner. No nonsense, no excuses, no shortcuts. She didn't care where you came from. She cared if you could listen to the machine. Feel that, she'd say, pressing a hand to a vibrating pipe. That ain't instability. That's fear. The metal's telling you it's cold. You gotta warm it right before you feed it fuel. When someone rolled their eyes, she'd hand them a wrench and walk away. Learn it or leave, she'd say. Most stayed. The engine room became a haven, somewhere between a workshop and a church. There were no tuition fees, no degrees handed out, but what they learned there couldn't be taught in lecture halls. Loretta taught them to trust their senses, to read vibrations like Braille, to draw blueprints by feel, to see technology as something alive, not manufactured. The Auburn faculty took notice. One day, a professor named Dr. Carlin Gwynn showed up unannounced. She was young, sharp-eyed, and wore a blazer 2 sizes too tight from stress. I'm head of the engineering mentorship program, she said, extending a hand. We'd like to formally partner with your workshop. Loretta didn't shake her hand. She looked her up and down. You got room for dirty shoes and broken resumes? She asked. Dr. Nguyen hesitated. We'd be offering resources, supplies, maybe funding. In return, we'd love if some of your students could contribute to our lunar prototype. Loretta chuckled. Now you want the brains behind the grease. Nguyen flushed. Look, we know we overlooked you. The system, all of it. But we're trying to do better. Loretta finally shook her hand. Then prove it. Bring your best. But leave your ego at the door. One humid Thursday evening, as summer teased the edge of Alabama's skies, Loretta stood outside the engine room while Eli and a dozen others tinkered inside. Someone played music, soft jazz with a fast drum beat, and it matched the rhythm of the tools within. She lit a cigarette, something she did only when her thoughts got too heavy. As the smoke curled above her head, a black Cadillac pulled into the lot. An older man stepped out, neatly dressed, balding, but his eyes were the same sharp hazel she remembered from 1973. Loretta, he said, like it was both a greeting and a question. Dr. Salton, she replied coolly. Thought you were dead. He gave a weak smile. Feels like I should be. She didn't invite him to sit. He stood anyway. I saw the Smithsonian piece. I didn't know they kept your name off the patent, he said. That wasn't me. That was the board. You were the board, she said, her voice flat. He looked down. I'm sorry. No, you're not. You're just old. Silence hung between them, brittle and sharp. Then, softer, she added. You told me I'd never be more than a glorified lab assistant. Said I should be grateful to even be in the room. He nodded slowly. I was wrong. She flicked ash off her cigarette. Yes, you were. He cleared his throat. I'm not here for forgiveness. I just wanted to see if you were still building things. She gestured to the engine room. They are. I just light the fire. He smiled. Well, it's burning bright. She turned away and walked back toward the garage. Good night, Dr. Salton. He didn't follow. The Lunar Cryogenic Engine project took form over the next 3 months. Under Loretta's guidance, the student team developed a new injection system inspired by one of her forgotten designs, a spiral coil diffuser that allowed for controlled thermal regulation without sacrificing acceleration. The Auburn faculty, now fully on board, brought the prototype to NASA's intern demo day. It worked flawlessly. The judges, stunned by its simplicity and power, awarded the team top honors. The headline the next day didn't name Eli, or Auburn, or the dean. It said, Waitress turned engineers design shakes NASA convention. Loretta didn't attend the award ceremony. She was in the engine room, cleaning tools and organizing wires into neat little loops. When Eli brought her the trophy, she stared at it for a long time. You want this? She asked. He shook his head. It's yours. She shrugged. Put it on the shelf next to the busted carburetor. I like balance. Then she turned back to her work. That winter, they got a letter from NASA. Official, gold seal, addressed to L. James, Director of Community Propulsion Lab. Inside was a proposal to host a joint educational program between NASA's Propulsion Academy and Loretta's engine room. They wanted to send interns, fund supplies, offer full accreditation. They even wanted to name the initiative after her. Loretta stared at the letter a long time. Then she said aloud, if they're serious, they'll build the next engine here, in this room. And that's exactly what happened. In the middle of a sleepy Alabama lot, behind a greasy spoon diner, a new kind of propulsion program was born, one built on rhythm, sweat, and second chances. Over the next year, students from across the country applied for a spot in the engine room. Not because it was prestigious, but because it was real. They didn't learn to just calculate. They learned to listen. And Loretta? She never gave another press interview, never accepted honorary degrees. But she taught every single student the same lesson. Machines break. Systems fail. People forget. But rhythm? Rhythm never lies. Winter passed into spring. The cracked concrete around Mel's diner started blooming with stubborn yellow flowers. The kind that no one planted, that no one asked for, but that came back anyway, year after year, just to prove they could. So did Loretta. Every morning she unlocked the engine room by 7 a.m., swept the floor, wiped down the tables, checked the torque on every student-assembled frame. She never used a clipboard. Her checklist lived in her mind, just like the old equations did. One afternoon, while realigning a fuel intake valve with a pair of high school interns, one of the girls asked her, Miss Loretta, did you always love engines? Loretta wiped her hands with a rag. No, not always. What did you want to be when you were a kid? There was a pause. Loretta didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced out the window, toward the distant hills that rolled along the Alabama sky. When I was a little girl, she said slowly, I wanted to be invisible. The room fell quiet. Invisible? The other intern asked. Loretta nodded. Thought maybe if no one saw me, no one could tell me who I couldn't be. The girl frowned. But now everybody knows who you are. Loretta gave a half smile. Yeah, funny how it all flips. Later that night, she sat alone in the engine room. The lights were off, except for one above the old RL-10B, 2 mock-up, now rebuilt as part of a hands-on display. It didn't work, not realize it was never meant to fly again. But students traced its bolts, took it apart, put it back together. Loretta called it the first heartbeat. She was about to lock up when she saw someone standing outside the fence. It was a woman in a gray coat, holding a notebook. You lost? Loretta asked, stepping out. The woman shook her head. No, ma'am. Looking for you. She looked young, early 30s maybe, but her eyes held the weariness of someone who'd had to fight for space in every room she entered. A familiar kind of tired. I'm from the office of the White House Initiative on STEM Equity, she said. We've been following your work. Loretta sighed. You one of those people trying to name a program after me again? The woman smiled. No, I want you to name one. Loretta raised an eyebrow. We're launching a national mentorship initiative, the woman continued, for underserved youth. Black girls, Native kids, immigrants. Places the system doesn't even pretend to reach. We want to bring them into labs like this. Real ones. Local ones. And you want me to run it? Loretta asked. We want you to lead it. Loretta looked past her. The stars had begun to prick through the dusk, just faint pinholes of light in the darkening sky. You know what happens when you put a poor kid with talent in a big fancy lab? She asked. The woman waited. They think they don't belong. They don't speak the language. They don't wear the right shoes. They keep their questions quiet so no one finds out how much they don't know. The woman nodded. We want to build labs where they do belong, where they can ask out loud. Loretta didn't answer right away. She stepped back inside, picked up the old welding goggles she'd used since '78, and turned them over in her hands. Then she said, all right, I'll name it. She didn't pick her own name. That would have felt like vanity. She named it after someone who never got to finish her journey. The May Ellis Initiative for Rhythmic Engineering. May Ellis was Loretta's mother, a factory seamstress who could hear when a motor was about to break just by how the thread jumped on the needle. She'd once told Loretta, "Baby, everything that moves makes music. Just learn the beat." Loretta did. The May Ellis Initiative launched 6 months later, starting with 5 engine room hubs across the South. Each hub was run by someone Loretta trained herself. They didn't hire teachers, they hired listeners. Mechanics, machinists, lab aides, retired engineers with no PhDs but decades of wisdom in their knuckles. Every hub had a photograph of Loretta at 19, hanging next to a simple sign. Machines don't care about your skin, but the world does. Change the machine, then change the world. 2 years passed. One afternoon, Eli came back from grad school. He'd been accepted into NASA's propulsion team. On his first visit home, he walked into Mel's, now partly converted into a community cafe and study space, and found Loretta wiping tables. You haven't retired? He asked, laughing. She gave him a look. Retire from what? I am the job. He slid into the booth across from her and laid a thick folder on the table. We're building a new orbital drop engine. It's modular. We're using some of your diffuser theory again. I kept pushing them to credit you, and well. He opened the folder. Her name was on the first page. L. James Legacy Design Consultant. She stared at it. You know what legacy is? She asked him. He shrugged. It's not your name in a folder, she said. It's when the machine breathes like you did. It's when someone somewhere hears that rhythm and says, that sounds familiar. Eli nodded. Still trying to catch the beat, he said. You'll hear it. Just shut up long enough. On her 60th birthday, Loretta stood in the middle of the engine room and did something she hadn't done in decades. She danced. It was awkward, full of slow steps and old bones, but she moved with the kind of grace that only came from survival. Her students laughed, clapped, and joined her. There was no music playing, just the clanging of tools, the hum of engines in progress, and the sound of new dreams being welded into form. Later that night, someone handed her a cupcake with a single candle in it. She stared at it. Make a wish, Eli said. She closed her eyes and whispered, I wish they never laugh at another black girl with a wrench again. Then she blew out the candle. Years from now, when people tell her story, some will focus on the NASA engine. Others will talk about the diner. A few might remember her welding goggles, or the way she always tied her apron with 2 knots instead of 1. But the ones who mattered, the ones she taught, they would remember something else. They would remember how she taught them to listen, how to tune their machines the way you tune your soul, how to walk into a lab knowing that brilliance doesn't always wear lab coats or answer to sir, how to rebuild something that the world gave up on and make it sing again. Loretta James never wanted fame. She wanted rhythm. And in the end, she didn't just find it. She became it. The end. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.